Welcome back to Linux Launch, Basic Linux Skills with the C Model Framework. We're now working through our first module, which is on Command Line Basics, and we're using the acronym COMMAND. We've covered the letter C for console and O for orientation. Now we're on the letter M. We'll use this map of the class at the beginning of each lesson to track our progress. The letter M stands for Mapping the File System. To use Linux well, we need to understand how the file system is laid out, how to find our way around. Linux uses a tree structure for its files and directories. Directories just means folders. It's kind of like an upside-down tree where the root is at the top. That slash at the top is called root. If you run pwd and it shows just a slash, that means you're in the root directory, which is the parent of everything else. Beneath that slash, you can see these other directories. For example, boot. If you run pwd and you see /boot, that means you're in the boot folder, which is directly in root. Now there are two key things to remember about Linux. Number one is that everything is treated like a file. Number two, everything lives under root. It's a unified layout. Root is the entry point to everything in Linux. Now that's different from Windows, where you have separate drives like the C drive or D or E if you have attached drives. In Linux, it's all one big tree under slash or root. This is part of something called the VFS, the Virtual File System, which creates a unified structure. No matter how many devices or partitions you have, it's all unified under root. Now here's an illustration of the difference between Windows and Linux. Think of Windows like a subdivision. Each house is separate and you have to enter them individually. Linux is more like an apartment building. There's one front door, which is root, and from there you can reach everything else. Now let's look at some of the most important folders directly under root. /bin, this is where you'll find essential tools like ls, cp for copy or mv for move. /sbin, this is where you'll find system tools, usually for admins, things like reboot. /etc, this is configuration files. Think of this like Windows System 32 /config. /home, that's where our user folders live. It's sort of like in Windows you would go to the C drive and to the users folder. In Linux you go to /home. /lib, this would be our shared libraries. To continue our comparison with Windows, you can think of it like Windows DLL's dynamic link libraries. /media, USB drives and removable storage would get attached here. /opt, opt stands for optional, so optional software like third-party apps would be here. For instance, if you installed Google Chrome, it might live in this directory. /proc, proc is a virtual directory for process and kernel information. /dev houses device files representing hardware components. /var, var stands for variable, and this is where variable data is located, things like logs that change frequently. Now those are some first level directories. The fact that they start with slash and there's nothing else before that slash means they're directly under root. You don't have to remember all of this at this point. This is just about early exposure. Now let's look at some second level directories. /var/www, website files served by a web server like Apache would be found here. And we already mentioned /var/logs. You'll come here often to look at system logs. /home/user1. This would be a user folder if you had a user by that name. If you have multiple users on your system, each of them will have a folder here. These are all examples of second level directories. This helps illustrate how things are laid out in Linux. You start with the root, slash, followed by a first level directory like etc, home, or var, and then a second level directory like network or www. Here are some files that you'll see. /etc/host. This file maps host names to IP addresses for local name resolution bypassing DNS. We'll learn more about this in networking. /etc/passwd. Now, by the way, I say /etc, but often I just call it etc. But passwd is where user account information is stored. Things like the username, the UID, the home directory, and the default shell for the user. /dev/SDA. This one's very important. /dev stands for devices, and SDA is your hard drive. Yes, even hardware is treated like a file in Linux. Let's look at this in the Linux terminal. Here in our terminal, let's run the command cd/dev. cd means change directory, and now let's run ls. This means list the contents of the directory. When we press enter and run that, we can scroll down here and we'll see SDA1, SDA2, and SDA3. These are partitions on our hard drive. Let's do one more that we talked about. Let's go to /home. So we'll run the cd/home command. Now we'll run ls to list the things in this directory, and you can see the sysvin folder here, which is my username. So this is where my user content would be stored. Again, you don't have to remember all of this today. This is just a conceptual overview to help you get your bearings. The more time you spend using Linux, the more natural the structure will become. So that's it for the letter M, mapping the file system. In the next lesson, we'll cover the second letter M, which stands for mobility, how to move around the file system. And I'll see you in the next lesson.